record, and I'm going to get started. So welcome everyone. I'm excited to have Derek Winn of Business Benefits Group to go over better benefits benchmarking. Derek and I have known each other for about a year. We talk everything from stocks to benefits to early Virginia financial history. So we have quite a few topics that we're interested in and things that kind of connect us. So it's great to have Derek, who's an early customer to the Lobby Group's benchmarking tool. And so we wanted to put together kind of a presentation of an early customer and kind of some experiences and use cases and yeah. So I'll turn it over to Derek. So we'll kind of he'll be driving this, but we'll kind of like collaborate back and forth, and then we can have some questions. So the idea is to get this under a half hour, and but we'll go from there.
Cool. Awesome. Here we go. So, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I look for in terms of, the benchmarking tool, and I'll let Joe chime in on the slide, but I think the biggest thing I look at is, again, where people tend to think they fall isn't always like their reality. I'll give you a really good example is if you talk to a client about general affordability issues, they tend to come back with things like, well, we pay our employees well, right? And that's kind of like a common misnomer or misunderstanding is you could pay your employees far higher than the median salary in the US, they could still have an affordability issue, right? So Joe, you want to talk a little bit about the distribution you're kind of looking at here?
Yeah. I was looking for like actuary joke slides, and I settled on the distribution. So, we're all familiar with the normal distribution, sort of the bell curve, and a lot of what you see in benchmarking, whether you read like the Kaiser Family Survey or whatever you're used to seeing, is a lot of it's done in averages. So the average would kind of be like the peak of this distribution here. That, for many purposes, is not sufficient. It's not sufficient in many domains. It's not sufficient in benchmarking because whatever the average is, first of all, there's adjustments, and then no one really wants to be average at everything. I mean, we're all average at something, but it is a little bit scary when all we see is averages, and there's a lot of stuff on the tails that's sort of hidden with that. And we'll go through some scenarios to talk about kind of beyond the averages.
Yeah, I'll give you an example too, like especially when you talk healthcare costs. There was a study done, I think it was earlier this year, where they talked about the average healthcare spend versus median healthcare spend in America. And the average healthcare spend is over $11,000 on healthcare goods and services, but the median is only $660, right? So the question is what are you dealing with? Are you talking in terms of averages, right? Are you dealing in averages? Because we know in healthcare, costs can skew averages quite heavily. Right.
Right.
It's better to look at the medians.
Yep. That is the experience of many more people, and especially with out-of-pocket costs, you're going to see it's a very skewed distribution. This slide is what are you getting, right? You see companies say, hey, we're offering benefits. Are you getting a Tesla, or are you? I assume some of you know what this is. This is a Yugo. So are you getting a Tesla or getting a Yugo? And this can vary. Like, some firms can offer Teslas to single employees, and then they offer Yugos to those with family coverage. And so that's some of the things with the tool. You can kind of target different coverage tiers to say, hey, are we being consistent? Obviously, not every firm is Google and is going to be offered this, but it's good to know like where you fit, because saying we give you a car, saying we offer benefits is not the same thing as saying, what are the nuances of it? Are we bragging about the rims of the car, or are we bragging about the totality of the package? So I think it's a good way to think about it. Like, are you getting a Tesla or are you getting a Yugo?
Yeah. And even furthermore on that, you get a lot of clients who will sit there and say, this is what we want. We want the Tesla, but it doesn't mean your employees do. Right. So right. I think it always comes back to infusing flexibility. And if you have flexibility in your benefits program, you're going to have flexibility in choices for everybody. I know I would drive a Yugo. Like, that looks kind of fun. And take it out in the field and drive it around. Yeah, it's a good time.
In the benchmarking, in getting beyond the averages and talking about a Tesla and a Yugo, just to touch briefly, and we'll kind of at the end we'll kind of circle back and look at the actual tool. But if you look at like what is in the data, so we have over 2,500 firms, and there's tens of thousands of data points that come up with that. So there's the whole adage, like, to make something simple is pretty complicated. It takes a lot of work, and I believe that's the case here. So some of the key values are, what does this mean for the employees? So looking at 2021 when we have 8 million job openings and this is becoming more of a question, like what is the key value for the employees? So we're looking at some of the key things are net employee payroll. So what is the employee seeing? And to your point on mean versus median, if the median person is seeing more of the lower, $600 to $700, they care a lot what's coming out of their paycheck because that's more consistent. Like that is the fixed cost. And then looking at plan values. So, what is this? Is this a gold plan? Is this a bronze plan? Is this a platinum plan? And then again, looking at percentiles, not just looking at the middle of the distribution, all on one page. And then we'll go through some scenarios of, how you can target certain values or as a broker, how you can kind of say, hey, where is my plan stacking up relative to firms like me, just on a premium basis? So there's a lot of opportunities there.
I think there's always an opportunity when you're talking about quality, right? And I think what you really have to come back to is you have to understand what drives a client. And you really have to understand that most of the time you're delivering, let's say the insurer or your plan, whatever it may be, the scenario you're dealing with, they're delivering lemons that you're expected to turn into lemonade. And kind of going back to just being average, no one wants to be average. Well, sometimes I strive to be average. I'd like to step up my game in some areas because I'm below average, right? But like here's a good example, which is you have to understand what the perception is, because the client perception is your reality. If they just think you bring them lemons all the time, we need to turn lemons into lemonade. I mean, it's a play on words. I mean, it's been around, like I'm kind of beating this to death at this point, but at the end of the day, the client's perception is your reality. And you have to figure out a way to fight through their reality. And sometimes clients need a dose of reality. And that's where I actually see a ton of value in terms of this benchmarking tool, is it's more to kind of keep the client expectations in check. And we'll give you a story on this in a little bit later, but you want to be able to figure out how to work with the deck you're dealt. And sometimes that includes doing some really innovative, alternative, fun things. And you say to them, look, you can continue to throw money at a problem, or we can actually fix the problem. That's really what it kind of comes down to. And that's when you start to have great gains, when you're doing innovative stuff. One of the big things that we look at is we look at challenges, right? Everyone has challenges. And one of the biggest challenges people have are resources. Great example. I could ask everyone on this webinar today, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to doing more? Like, what is the biggest hurdle you have to overcome? And I think almost everybody would say it's time. If I had more time, I would prospect more. If I had more time, I would, roll up my sleeves and get into some of this stuff. If I had more time, I would go to the gym, right? Time is always like the biggest resource that people are concerned about. But keep in mind, we've got other resources we have to deal with, mostly monetary in nature, right? Clients have a budget they have to stick to, so we have to help them with that. One of the biggest things that plays into is just a general lack of understanding. We have to elevate our clients, help our clients to know more, to learn more, to develop, and actually understand what drives cost, what drives decisions, behavioral economics behind the plans that employees choose, right? And then what ends up happening in that process, once you identify kind of like the budget you're dealing with, whether it's time, money, energy, whatever it may be, once you also get to the point of understanding, like, again, what the reality could be, or what their actual goals are, then what you have to do is you have to figure out a way to convey value. Sometimes conveying value comes down to a simple conversation of, look, here's where you stack up. Here's where your benefits actually stack up to other employers in your area. You're always going to have employees who come to you and say, but this company does something better. And my argument oftentimes to those employers are, quite simply, like, if you really need to bend over backwards to get that candidate, because they're so hung up on your healthcare benefits, like, do you really want that candidate? Because will they ever be happy? You know what you own, you know what you hold as far as your benefits program. Here's how it stacks up. Like, will you ever keep them happy? Or are you just going to be replacing that position 6 to 9 months down the road? This is a good way to do some global benchmarking. And then you can get down to specifics. You can tell that employee, okay, go get me the benefits information for your prior employer, and let's look at it. Or let's go look at the information from the company that's trying to recruit you. That stuff that we do as advisors all the time. What you have to do is you have to understand what those actual challenges are. Because oftentimes, again, it comes back to a dose of reality. Here's why your benefits aren't competitive. Maybe you're not spending enough. Maybe your deductibles are too high, whatever it may be. I like to think about, what happens in a year's journey. This is kind of like cyclical in nature. You go into, you've got a go live days. So let's just start at the beginning of the year. You've got a plan that just renewed with the most best option, right? You pick the lesser of maybe several evils where your health plan costs are increasing, or maybe you're just kind of kicking the can down the road before you do something more innovative, whatever it may be. And then usually around April, May, or June, you start getting feedback. It's usually a few months after. People have to get a few months of experience under the belt, whatever it may be. Your goal should be to always gather feedback and create a feedback loop with that client. If you're only talking to your clients 3 times a year, like you're missing gaps in feedback, right? And more often than not, you're playing a very reactionary role. But this is a great opportunity to go and jump ahead of that and bring them data and say, hey, I want to do a tabletop exercise with you. I want to do an after action review. I want to look at all the decisions you made last year. And I want to also at the same time, give you some alternative realities, give you some alternative options that we could be looking at if we had, made a different choice. Oh, and by the way, here's the data in terms of how your plan stacks up. What you tend to find is that if you're doing this mid-year review, and I love doing this like mid-year, it sometimes, one, allows you to stay ahead of the curve, but also 2, at the same time, it allows that client to maybe voice some concerns to you that otherwise they wouldn't have. So it's just creating a forum and an opportunity around data, right? Around benchmarking, around claims, whatever it may be. You've got to do that. You got to do that, especially on your more sophisticated clients. The other big thing too is when it comes down to renewal. Now you're talking about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Is it another 10% increase, 20% increase, 30% increase? Is Derek just going to come in here and talk about self-funding again? Because I know I'm not ready for that, right? Like these are the realities we have to deal with, right? The biggest reality though, is that they're afraid of what's happening. So you have to triangulate 2 different things. Number one, you have to triangulate data. So what's happening within the industry, what's happening with healthcare costs, what's happening as far as cyclical trends, right? But also at the same time, you have to put their information on that same plane. Here's where you are. Here's where you fit. Here's the things that we could improve this year. Here's some ways we can do that without impacting your resources or your budget, right? It's all about finding innovation. The other thing you got to think about too is competition. Employers are worried about competition all the time. All the time. They're concerned about who's going to take their revenue, who's going to take their employees. What about government intervention? What about new legislative items? What about new taxes? I mean, this is a big topic that I think everyone has to start to think about. Is there's an alternative universe that's kind of out there today that wasn't there maybe a year or 2 ago. A year ago, we were talking about COVID, right? And that was the biggest threat to business and sustainability. Now you look at it though, and it's like, well, what are the threats? Is inflation a threat? Well, sure. I think inflation also impacts healthcare costs. So when you've got deferred healthcare services from 2020 that haven't been fulfilled yet, and at the same time, we're entering a period of inflation that we've long denied, but we've known is there, and now it's being admitted. What will that do to your healthcare costs, right? So you have to figure this out. Like employers have all these different areas of competition, but you as a broker have areas of competition. As a consultant, as an advisor, as a vendor, whatever it may be, you need to find ways to bring value. So you have to think about like, how do you convey your advantages? And a lot of that is really going to come down to hustle, grit, determination. Sometimes you might be relying on data. Sometimes you might be relying on extra tools or resources, right? But you really have to leverage those. If you can leverage your IP and show that you're leveraging that alongside of data, that's what's going to drive the decision for the C-suite. CFOs are looking for data. CFOs live in a highly data-driven world, right? And that's a big shift for our industry. You can't just rely on relationships. We need data. We need info. We need results. So the other part I'll say about this is that most of your problems, when it comes down to an employer who says, hey, I heard blank. Well, when they say I heard blank, that usually means that they talk to another broker or a consultant, advisor, whatever it may be. Maybe they talk to the CPA. Maybe they talk to the payroll company who's trying to put them in a PEO or something like that, right? Most of your problems begin with hearsay. Same thing for employers. Hey, I heard that ABC company was offering blank for a benefit. I heard that, Joe got a better benefit than I did because He came here and he said that his old company used to pay less money or pay more money toward his benefits. So you guys gave him an increase in his salary, right? What you have to do is you have to discuss these things. And again, that starts with opening up an opportunity. And then you identify what the actual problem is. Good example. Our employees are saying our benefits are expensive. Well, no, actually your benefits are below your peer group in terms of total cost. You're just a cheapo. You spend too little toward your benefits, right? Like that's a real conversation. And then what you do is you figure out a way to solve the problem. So you could either spend more money toward that problem, put good money into bad, or we could continue to lower the cost of healthcare, which could, depending on how you do it, create additional problems. So here's you got something, Joe? Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say there's so many programs that are additive that have shown either neutral or actually negative return on investment. So if a company's putting a bunch of money in there buying fancy hubcaps for the Yugo, it's like, well, what's really the return on investment, right? And that could come in the form of giving $1,000 wellness credit, wellness dollars to someone for filling out a health questionnaire, right? And those are notorious for people saying, how many drinks do you have a week? Like, people just notoriously don't tell the truth on those surveys. So it's by having some of the benchmarking data, you're able to then say, well, if I have these dollars, and where is it better to then allocate?
Yeah,
I think it's a useful piece.
100%. Like you got to figure out where to put the money. I don't know who said this a long time ago. I heard it on a podcast or something, but just go with it, right? Which is, a dollar you spend on healthcare is a dollar you can't spend on something else. And it doesn't matter if it's a premium or if it's the added benefits. Again, you go back to the challenges we're facing right now. What's the one thing most employers and employees want? They want more. Mm-hmm. That's really, if you define it and you break it down, people want more. They want more tools and resources to support individuals with the digitalization of healthcare, mental health services, family support, legal benefits, whatever it may be. They want to do more. They want to do family leave. Like these are things you've got to be thinking about. That money doesn't come out of vapor. We're not the federal government where we can just print money, right? We have to figure out ways that we can help employers to divert revenue that's going into, let's just say, a loss leader. Okay. So this is, again, a good example, right? When we look at this, everyone knows what these charts say, but keep in mind, this is just data, right? You're giving employers data with this. You're not actually comparing their group, unless, of course, you're taking the time of charting out their deductible cost increases year over year, the premiums are year over year, so on and so forth. Like you have to do that if you want to actually say, and here's where you're performing. Okay. And a lot of advisors aren't willing to do that. So the other thing too, is when it comes down to premium, sure, you could chart out that client year over year, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, you're not actually giving them anything more than data in most cases, right? What you need to do is you need to show them definitively, not just like, here's average and you're above it or below it, but here's how far away you are in terms of the range. Right. And again, it goes back to like the very first part. So like, here's a real example. So this is literally an example I did for a client this week. I had another example and decided I was going to roll with this one instead. So I want to just kind of walk through a couple of data points on this, because this is just a great example of how you can use the tool. I'll tell you, me personally, like the thing I love about the tool the most is the ability to do this quickly and on the fly. Right. So in fact, like one of the tools we use to calculate employee cost and help employers to cast those figures already breaks it down to an annual figure. So we can just go in here and just dump in the annual premium, dump in the plan design. It's the cornerstones. Employers don't care about what the median hospital copay is. Maybe they do, but they shouldn't. And that's part of our job, is to say, look, like that doesn't matter. It's the same thing too as, here's a good example. Oftentimes we get a question of like, what percentage are employers contributing toward the premium? And that's just like the silliest thing you can think about, because I don't think about my Netflix bill in terms of a percentage of income. I think about it in terms of real hard dollars, right? I don't think about my car payment as, oh, well, I'm only going to pay 75% of my car payment this month. You can't do that. Repo man comes, right? You've got to look at it in terms of dollars. Like that's the number one thing you should be thinking about, is when you think about employee premiums and you think about the cost, they don't care what percentage it is. You could pay 90% on a plan that costs, I don't know, $30,000 a year, right? As opposed to another employer that pays 80% toward a plan that costs $15,000 a year, right? Like you've got to think about it differently. So with the tool, here's a good example. So this client, they ended up this year, they're in a level funded health plan. They've been in this plan for a few years. The first thing you want to look at is, what is their plan? So you got a $1,500 deductible plan, then you got a no deductible 90% co-insurance plan, right? So this is just a high deductible plan. It's not an HSA, but it's an option they put in this year because they had to lower their fringe cost. Okay. They didn't want to do anything innovative, didn't want to look at other carrier changes. They said, no, like we can do with the increase. We're just going to do this. We're going to keep our contributions roughly flat. And it's going to cover about 100% of, the premium here for employees as a family. Okay. So you see here, like their net employee cost is awesome. They pay nothing, free, right? And also at the same time, you get to see over here, like here's your premium, right? So what's cool about this is they are, below average in terms of cost. So the total net cost of their health plan, on this plan, it's $5,100 a year. Awesome, phenomenal. Their employee cost, $0. Awesome, even better. And again, their average as far as the deductible, their average as far as the out-of-pocket max. So to have an average plan at a below average cost is great.
Yeah.
Super. People, here's a good example. You can't complain about free. Well, guess what? Most of the employees complained about free because they were too focused on a $0 deductible plan. And the employer is trying to wonder, and they're curious about this, like, how is it that we're getting all these complaints? And that's because people don't like change. People didn't want to consider a plan that cost them nothing to take on a $1,500 deductible because this is more convenient. Okay, well, let's talk about cost real quick. Remember before, we're way below average in terms of the cost over here. Well, guess what? We're also pretty far below average over here too. Okay, like not quite, but like we're at least below average. But the problem is the employee cost is way above average. They're in like the top 20th percentile. Well, why is that? Well, it's because the employer is taking the same dollar amount from here and contributing toward this plan. So when you've got a plan that's way below average and you're paying 100% of the premium, and that gets carried over here, what happens is employees are paying more because the premium cost more, right? So when you look at this and you start to break it down, this is the reality that we started to change for the employer, which is now you can give your employees a plan that costs nothing. Before they had a small cost share, now they have no cost share. And they're a heavily, single group, like they're young IT guys, right? Yeah. But at the same time, the people didn't want to change. And all they did was look at that deductible and say, well, I don't want to pay that. I'd rather pay an above average cost to do this. So by working through this process with that client, like the client literally called me, I said, great, let's hop on a Zoom in 20 minutes. I pulled these together and we had the data up. Like you can't do that most of the time. Otherwise, and again, let me rephrase that. I had the benchmarking up. Typically with 20 minutes time without this tool, the best I'd have is data. We'd be looking at charts that were more like this, right?
Yep.
Now I can drop in a few data points. I even sat there with them and said, look, let's be fair for a second. We got, 2,500 businesses in this. I can take out a lot of these and your numbers are roughly going to be the same. I took out things like the mining, construction, et cetera. I took out manufacturing, retail, and also wholesale, right? I left everything else in there. I got, more into white and gray collar groups, and the numbers didn't really move much. What happened was your range got smaller, but where that client fell really didn't shift. And that's because healthcare is a universal problem. It doesn't matter if you're, a lawyer. Like this is a great thing about America and American healthcare. It doesn't matter if you're a lawyer, a doctor, a paver, a roofer. It doesn't matter. You're going to the same doctors, going to the same hospitals, right? Like that's the universal truth about healthcare. So industry and getting clients to understand that size doesn't always matter and the industry doesn't always matter. That's a great way to think about it too. You now have more ability to show them that on the fly, right? It's just fun.
Yeah, that's super helpful to have like the side by side of that, because like you say, the participant is looking at dollars, right? Dollars out of their pocket, and the guaranteed dollars that come out of their pocket are premium. And oftentimes the deductible is held as if the employee paycheck contributions don't exist, right? And then if, beyond the scope of this example, you can look at family structure and see how that varies too, because those, of course, are the two biggest tiers, the single and the family. So this has been super helpful, Derek, these examples and how you've been able to use it so quickly. And I have the tool. I can pull some examples, but I think we're up on time. I just wanted to, if you have any closing comments, and then we can kind of open it up for a couple of questions, if there are any questions. But again, this is recorded, so I'll send a follow-up email, and then including a link too, if you want to run a trial of the tool. It's no obligation, and you can try it out for yourself. So anything else you'd add?
Yeah, I would say, like, this is not a paid promotion. Like, I'm not, this is just me trying to put the data out there, because especially if you're an independent advisor, again, it goes back to who you're competing against. What are they bringing to the table? I recently have been working on a client project where I'm helping them choose a broker. So help your broker choose your broker kind of thing. So it's just a paid consulting gig. And it's interesting because all the big consulting houses, what do they leverage? They leverage their size, they leverage their data. They talk about how they can use benchmarking to control cost. Like, think about that for a second. Does any of this lower the cost of a doctor visit or an MRI or anything like that? It does maybe with plan design to kind of push things to the limit or shift more cost to employees. But you can use this to defend your clients and also win business, because it's a different conversation.
Yeah.
You stand out in that and you see the client, the way they react in that process. It's a great way to have a different conversation on the fly using real data and a tool that you can easily modify.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, fantastic. Are there any questions? There's I got a note from Patrick Hill. Great presentation. Most large consulting firms talk benchmarking, but do not act upon the data and change the conversation. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I mean, we'd be jealous of all that data, but the question is how to use the data.
Yeah. Daniel Corliss asks, can I pay premium with crypto?
Maybe, but you definitely can't do a Tesla with it anymore. At least not for now.
Yeah. Well, I think we're there on time.
Cool.
I'm available if you have any questions, and I'll include a summary of this. You can always put it on 1.5 speed. And if you have any questions, I'll happy to answer.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks. Thanks, Derek. Bye.
Talk soon.